The Count of Monte Cristo by Alexandre Dumas. Dumas. This is one of the most famous prison escape stories ever told.
We ought to file that under educational too.
Edmond Dantès is a young 19-year-old sailor who has the world in front of him. He has a prestigious position. He's about to marry the woman he loves. Everything just looks great for him. Then he has three enemies who conspire his downfall, and he is arrested and taken to the Château. For years, he's in solitary confinement until his next-door neighbor tunnels into his cell and he meets the Abbé. The Abbé is an old man that tells him of a secret treasure hidden on an island, the island of Monte Cristo. Edmond Dantès escapes the Château, finds his way to the island, gets the treasure, and he swears vengeance on the people who did him wrong. Let me start off by saying this is a 5-star novel. If an alien didn't understand what a novel was and didn't understand why people spent so many hours reading novels, I would show that alien the Count of Monte Cristo. It has everything in it. Great characters, great themes, an interesting historical setting, France in the early 1800s. It elicits fascinating questions about right and wrong. It has it all. It's really a complete package of the perfect novel. But let me focus on the first part of the book, the first 250 pages. This part of the book is where you get the rising action. Edmond Dantès, everything is looking up, and then he goes to the prison, he meets the Abbé, and then he makes his escape. And yes, that is all within the first 250 pages. This is the section of the book where you really feel the injustice done to Edmond. And you feel the workings of revenge as he has to sit in this prison for a total of 14 years. And there's just something cool about having a secret conversation with an old man in a remote prison telling you about an island full of treasure that no one knows about. Like who wouldn't lean forward in their seat just hearing that as a premise for a story? It's genius. Here's the thing though, this book is 1,462 pages long. Edmond Dantès escapes the Château here at the 250 page mark. I remember reading this thinking, what else could possibly happen in these next 1,200 pages? He just has to get revenge. How can it possibly take that long? You kind of get to that part of the story and all these other characters start coming in and you start asking yourself, who are these people? How do they connect to the Edmond Dantès story? And it's like you have moved past the main thrust of the story and you're looking behind you oh, the story's way back there. What are we doing? But here's the thing. A big theme of this book is patience because the Count of Monte Cristo doesn't just rush in and reveal himself to his enemies and get his revenge. He very slowly goes about it through this elaborate scheme. Much to the surprise of the reader, and I think this is a pretty universal reaction to the Count of Monte Cristo, you want him to just rush in there, tell it like it is. But he was in the Château for 14 years. He's had 14 years of living basically in solitary confinement from when he was 19 to 33. And that is time that really stretches out. It's kind of like time flies when you're having fun, but the opposite scenario. So he's had a lot of time to think about what he would do if he gets out, what he'd do with the treasure, and so on. And so you get the sense as you're reading this book that his mind is adjusting to a new relativity of what time is. And so he's okay with waiting 10 years for his revenge. That's why any movie adaptation really cuts down this middle part. I don't know of any movie adaptation that really does the middle part justice. It would have to be a very long movie or a mini-series that's pretty subtle. But for the book's sake, it ends up working out. Side note, I tend to think of this book in a similar vein as Les Miserables, another book that I've reviewed on this channel recently. They're almost the exact same length. They were written by very similar authors. The authors lived in France around the same time period. These books were published around the same time period. And while Les Mis had its backstories, which I talk about in that video, this book has its side stories. So there's lots of characters to keep track of and relationships that all come together in the end. Once it finally got to the end, I felt like I had that same enthusiasm that I had in the beginning of the story, those first 250 pages. Like the last 250 pages, it's back to being really exciting because he's finally revealing himself. You know, it was me the whole time, and don't you recognize me? And just all these great dramatic scenes. I loved it. The revenge theme is fascinating here, and it's probably the central idea of the book. Because on the one hand, you think Edmond Dantès is perfectly justified for getting revenge because he was wronged. He got out of prison, and then he saw that everyone who wronged him was doing great and everyone who stood beside him were struggling. And so if you have all this surplus money, why not, you know, go into action and make everything right? Like there's just something that is satisfying about that. It feels good. It feels like justice is being done. And there's also something satisfying about this vigilante justice that he's executing, because he has all this money, he has these costumes, and he goes about in secret a lot of the time. Like he's basically the Bruce Wayne of the early 1800s France. But what's also fascinating about this is he doesn't get his revenge on the points that they wronged him. He gets his revenge on other things that they did after what they did to him. So he uses their own vices to lead to their own downfall. So what's the problem with this? At the end of the book, Edmond Dantès starts to see how much his plan worked even better than he was planning on, and it going a little too far. And that's when he starts questioning himself, like, what have I done? Who am I to be, you know, exacting justice? Why am I taking the place of God? Edmond Dantès finds out at the end that there's a lot of things that are just outside his control, and some of those results are horrifying. Another problem with this philosophically is how much suffering is required. If someone wrongs you, like, they should suffer for that, but like, how much and for how long? And do you want to be the one to decide what justice equals? Like, I picture if someone wronged you and then you had them hooked up to some electrical wires, and you had a dial and you could turn it up, and you could have them suffer for whatever you thought was fair for whatever injustice they did to you. Like, how long would you go? How much would you turn the knob? I mean, eventually you get to a point where you'd be like, okay, that's enough. We're even now. There's just something about that makes me really uncomfortable. Like, I think because you're taking satisfaction in watching someone else suffer. But the problem is it's all subjective. I think that's what makes it so unsettling to me. Also, I think there's a sense of you're like enjoying watching them suffer because they made you suffer. And that just hits me at a gut level, like sadism, the enjoying of the pain of others. It just seems intrinsically wrong. In all situations, even if the person that's suffering is terrible and did terrible things. In conclusion, this is a masterful novel, one of the best novels I've ever read, one of the best novels I've ever reviewed on this channel. It just makes you think about the world differently. I love the thought-provoking questions that this brings up, and I love the drama, I love the character. Okay, long story short, I loved everything about this novel, even the slow middle. This is in my personal Hall of Fame of greatest novels ever written. I'm going to give it 5 stars.